Evening all. Well, it's 5 o'clock on a Friday, so I think it's evening. I wanted to do a quick video to show everyone what was up with Matt's Lambo, or what we found and how we found it mainly. So backstory being, Matt went to Spain, it broke down in Spain, he had to leave it and then got it recovered back. So James Push, my colleague at Push, good mate of mine, went to meet them at the ferry, picked him up, brought it here, had Captain Insano taken a laptop and a RJ45 network cable with him. We could have helped, but he wouldn't have fixed it because he needed parts. So if anyone saw Matt's story that I sent him, then the fault was the crank sensor. It is in here somewhere. But when the car arrived here, it wouldn't start, wouldn't cough, wouldn't fire, wouldn't splutter, wouldn't do anything. It would just crank and crank and crank. So we obviously got the car. Battery was flat by the time it got to us. We charged the battery because there's a crank speed threshold on all cars, not just Syvecs, on all cars. So it won't fire the injectors and the coils until the RPM at cranking reaches a certain threshold. So we set this on the Syvecs, and it's set inside all your cars, the cars you drive. So we charge a battery, crank it over, wouldn't fire. No cough, no splutter, no nothing. Now, the first thing that's caught my eye is the fact the rev counter doesn't move when it's cranking. So instantly I'm thinking, okay, something's going on here. We got no engine speed. Plug the laptop in, get Xpel up, go into the software. I can instantly see I've got fuel pressure, high and low. So I've got DI pressure and I've got low pressure, and I can see no errors with any of the ancillaries or equipment bolted to the engine. So my throttle's there, my manifold pressure's there. So I should have everything I need to fire the car. We do another crank. So now I've got a laptop connected, I do another crank. I got no RPM. Right, okay. I got no RPM and I've got no what's called sync lock. So when an engine crankshaft is rotating, TDC 1 obviously happens every 360 degrees. But that doesn't mean, or you don't need, an ignition event and an injection event every 360 degrees. 4-stroke cycle, it takes 720 degrees. So you have an ignition and a combustion cycle every other downstroke. Bear with me. So I had no RPM, so I have no crank signal. So I have no what we would call reference. The cam sensor then gives you your synchronization. So the crank sensor spins. This is 60 minus 2. Getting proper geeky now. 60 minus 2. So the engine management system identifies top dead center on 1 by the missing tooth. So my engine management system doesn't know that. It can't see any rotation at all. So when I crank it over, the Syvecs is going, "You're not turning, mate. You're not turning, mate. You're not." So that's what it's doing. To then get an engine to fire, I then need sync lock. That's when the engine management system catches the rotation of the engine, and then the cam sensor catches the position or the event at TDC. So then by tuning in the shape of the waveform of the cam sensor on TDC 1 or on bank 1, cylinder 1, then you tell it when it's on ignition power stroke or exhaust stroke. I haven't even got I haven't got reference. So I go into the Xpel software, and I tell you what, if we go round the back here, I will show you. So let's just go and have a look at the software. So, pop the ignition back on. So, ignition on, and I'm connected. So, these are my live gauges. So, we've got RPM, manifold pressure, throttle position, lambda 1 target, lambda 2 target, or is there somewhere? Fuel trim, bank 1, bank 2, engine coolant temp and air charge temp, fuel comp, wastegate duty, blah 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 blah, stuff you don't need to see. Dip 1, dip 2 is DI pressure, and if I go G, I get this list so I can add a graph. If I then just type FP, I want FP1. We'll put it as a text and we'll put it as 5 Hertz. Now down here, look, I now have my fuel pressure. So sat here right now, I know I've got low pressure fuel and I've got high pressure fuel. Right, we're going, you kind of quickly knocking things out of the park as what could be causing it. So when I was spinning the engine over, that wouldn't move. Top left hand corner there, 0 would stay 0. Up here, so my sync state and would say stop. So even when it was turning over, it would say, oh, come on camera, focus. It would stay on stop. So if I go to this car now and spin over, it'll go 360, it'll go 720, and then it'll go run. And that's where it's 360 is it's caught the crank, 720 is it's caught the cam, and then run is engine running. So at this point we had no RPM. Right, let's add in our triggers then for our cam and crank. Let's just check those. So I quickly disconnected the cam sensor at the top. It's easiest to get to, and I put a voltmeter on it. The 5 volt supply for the 4 cam sensors and the crank signal is common. So, all right, unless I've got a severed wire, if I've got 5 volts on my cam sensor, stands to chance I've got 5 volts on my crank. So you kind of just rule those things out quick. The same with the ground as well. Bearing in mind, it's 200 quid for a sensor. I don't want to spend 200 quid of Matt's money for monkey diagnosis. That's not what we do. An hour with a voltmeter, a laptop, and a wiring diagram, and we'll get it nailed. So I got my 5 volt. I'm pretty sure I got my ground. I'm just missing. I've just got complete open circuit on my signal. So on the Syvecs, the crank signal is on AN13. So sorry, I'll do that again. So G takes me to my gauge page. A takes me to add. And now I can select my gauges. So I know AN9 is my crank signal. Right? Camera focus. And again, I'm just going to bang it in. I'm going to put this in as a trace. Right? And I'm going to put it, it's a crank and a cam, so we're going to bang it in as 50 Hertz. Right. So at the minute, I've got nearly 5 volts sat on my signal line. When I plugged into it the other day with Matt, I had like 2 volts. So something's pulling the signal line to ground. Right. I'm going to do the same on the cam. So main cam is AN13. So AN down to 13, and if you look there, so these are both connected, car runs, starts, drives. We're going to go to a trace. Don't know what I did there. Trying to drive through a camera lens. Trace, and again we'll just bang it on 50 Hertz. So as you can see now, cam and crank sensor, there we go. So now AN13, my cam sensor sat on a tooth, because it's pulled the signal completely to ground. But on AN9, my crank signal, that was all over the place. That was 2. If I cranked it over, it wouldn't do anything. So what I did then was, with a big long strand of wire and some pins I've got here that I know, so this micro timer in the crank sensor, and it's a Syvecs pin in the Syvecs, I depinned my crank sensor, a signal wire, and I literally run a wire up over the top of the charge cooler, into the engine, pinned it with a Syvecs pin, plugged it in, put it into the Syvecs, fired the car up, bosh, starts and runs. Done. So, sorry, it didn't start and run. Sorry, go back. It didn't start and run. It didn't change my values. So that proves that it's not a wiring problem. I still had my issue on the signal line. So, ordered a sensor, fitted the sensor with my new signal wire, put it in, starts and runs straight away. And that's the video I sent you guys with, or I sent Matt the other night that you would have seen this story. Put my original harness back in, so pin both ends back to OE, and again, starts and runs. So if we now go, if I go to, I'm sure it's gauge. There we go, view sync log, right? So that is the last crank signal from my cranking. That's my sync log, so that's my camera crank sensor. So I wonder if I can get, so that's what it should look like. So the top one, teeth, missing tooth. So that's my crank sensor, and that's my cam sensor. So that identifies, if I were to zoom out of this on a full scope, you can see position 1, and then there's obviously position 2 and a gap. So that's what identifies where TDC, that's TDC on 1, that's what identifies then what stroke you are on. Because if we go over here, look, you can just about see it. Yeah, that's 360 degrees later, but the tooth pattern on the cam looks completely different. So if we now go, I wonder if I'll catch it. So crank on the left, cam on the right, you can see there. Now if I go and fire this up, do that, watch now when I crank it. So if I switch it off and do it again, watch the rev counter just before it catches. I think it's too quick. But so that is how 200 quid little crank sensor ruined Matt's holiday. Put the ignition back on. So you can see there, look, now where my positioning, can you see now the cam sensor is saying 4 volts. So because the position of the engine when it stopped has not put a tooth in front of the sensor, the Hall effect isn't in effect. Is that the right way to say it? Basically, the Hall effect sensor is not pulling a signal line to ground. So now I'm on a gap. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That is what fixed Mr. Armstrong's Lambo. But this is sort of the. It took us an hour and a bit or whatever. It took us longer waiting for the part to turn up and to change the part, because it's a nightmare to change a crank sensor, than it did to sort of get to the bottom of what caused it. But I hope this helps show everybody what was wrong, how we fixed it, and that some of the YouTube viewers' comments of what might be caused, they should stick to watching YouTube videos. I think I saw 2 people get it right. I'll have to go back through the comments and I'll let you know who they were. But I'm sure I saw at least 2 people say crank sensor. So when me and Matt were chatting, my 3 theories were tracker. Well, I think we pretty quickly disproved that. Either a lambda probe causing the car to essentially have a fuel control wind up to the point that it either goes excessively lean or excessively rich, to the point that it can't run, or a crank sensor. So, there's a crank sensor fixed. So I hope you enjoyed this information video. Cheers guys, bye.